Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart and it's Dwarfen Mountain Holds release weekend finally. So what a perfect time to show you my Dwarfen Mountain Hold. Now this has finally arrived for Warhammer the Old World. I thought it was time I built some terrain for my Dwarfen Mountain Holds army. It's something I've been planning but looking for some inspiration, so over at warhammer.com, scrolling away, I spotted the Fyreslayer's Magmic Battleforge and saw that nice open mouth there and thought, what if that can become a door and entrance to a dwarf hold. Grabbed some cork bark from Element Games, had a little bit more myself from a walk the other day, and then I found these on eBay, which I've rescued. They look awful, but I've stripped most of the paint off. At this stage, I haven't quite decided how I'm going to use them, but I wanted a solid base to build it on rather than using some wood or something like that. I wanted a secondary piece of terrain to go with it. So another eBay rescue, another plastic Warhammer hill. Then I remembered I had quite a few of the Osgiliath ruins, the new ones for Middle-earth strategy battle game that I hadn't built yet, and I thought they could be a good source of brickwork and buildings to add into the terrain as well. I fished out my plaster of Paris rocks that I make, some of the kitty litter I use on my bases, and I had a pretty good idea in my head what I wanted to do. So rather than sketch it down, I thought I'd trim a few bits off the sprues and start playing around with some dry fits and seeing if it's going to work. Starting with that secondary piece of terrain, I like the idea of a small door that leads down underground on the top of this sort of mountainous hill here. So I started dry fitting what might be a little door entrance that I'll build some rock around the back of. So the idea is you go through your door and then walk your way down into the mountain. And that was it. I decided pretty early on that I liked the positioning and glued the first little bit in place, and that was it. I was going to put that aside to dry when I went back to work on the main piece. Now we're on to mocking up stage 2, and I decided to go the long way for the hills, open and right up, and I'm working a way of another entrance into the mountain holds for my dwarves. It wasn't going to be a main entrance, the door was far too small, and I needed to widen it or elongate it anyway, so I cut away the bottom of what I'm guessing is a forge. I don't know my AOS very well. So it wouldn't be the main door to the hold, but one of the smaller doors. So I decided to cut a fairly rough for now piece of foam core and hot glue it to the back of the hill, something to build my construction onto. And with that in place, I could start playing around with that doorway and some of the walls and rocks and things that I needed to add. See, I'm just playing here, placing it on close to where the edge of the hill rock there just sort of dips away as if there's a bit of a walkway. I didn't use much of that Magmic Battleforge in the end, just those little side bits there, so I've got quite a bit for later on. And then just looking at these brick walls that are in that Osgiliath set as well, and thinking that could form part of the man-made or dwarf-made part, and then using this rock bark around the edges to kind of blend it all in so it looks like it's built into the mountainside. And that's kind of how I worked, organically, bit by bit. So I've glued some of that together and I'm placing it again and working out what I'm going to do. Then I decided I wanted to put the doorway in behind so that the front part was more of a kind of a shelter or show, and then it's locked in on the inside. As you can see, I'm just sort of adding layers as we go. That's it, I've glued that in place. And it's just like the way I work. Some people would spend a lot more time planning, but I had it all in my head, or most of it in my head, so I just got on with it. Gluing a bit of that cork bark, which I've cut down a little bit to the side there, and slowly layering it up and gluing it on with the hot glue, a bit of super glue in places as well, and it starts to take shape. As I reach the smaller areas on the top, I'm gluing on bits of the plaster of Paris rock, or dropping it as I did there. And I make this stuff myself, just mix up some modelling plaster of Paris in a big sheet on a baking tray, some tin foil so it doesn't mess up my wife's baking tray, and then afterwards just break it up, smash it up with a hammer, and end up with all these sort of rubble bits. And as you can see, you can glue them in place here, adding some kitty litter along the bottom just to kind of blend it in a little bit more. I've got these small tiles which look like they could sort of be a broken walkway. I wanted to look a little bit run down. The dwarves are very much in decline, even though during the Old World lore and Old World period they seem to be on the up just slightly, or at least have visions of being on the up again. They're definitely in decline compared to the times before the Skaven and the Orcs and Goblins took over so many of their holds. And at this stage, it is very much a case of just slowly adding a little bit more glue, building up a little bit more texture with rocks, with bits of plaster of Paris, that kind of thing. And then using a little bit of texture paint here just to fill the gap between the two hills so they don't show up. And there you can see it's not fully dry there at the moment, but there's lots of cork bark and rock and kitty litter and sand and rubble and things. And once that's all sprayed and painted, it should look fantastic. So it's back to the smaller entrance, and like I said, I like the idea of that you go in the doorway and then you're going down some steps underneath the mountain. So I'm just using, again, cork bark here, just dry fitting, playing around, working how I'm going to use it to make it look like that it's all built into the side of the mountain or into the rock face. So there I am, straight in with my hot glue gun, starting to stick the larger pieces in place, and then I start to fill the gaps with the smaller bits, the cut-offs, the smaller bits of plaster of Paris and rocks and things as well. It does look a little bit haphazard, but as I keep saying, it's kind of the way I like to work. I just want to get on with it and not worry too much and play around with it like this and keep adding bits until it looks right. And just like the bigger piece, I'm filling in the gaps with the smaller rocks, so the bits of kitty litter, the bits of the plaster Paris rock that I make. Continuing to slowly build it up as I go around and try to make it look like it's naturally built into the rock face. And the more and more smaller bits that I add down the back here, it starts to look like it is cut into the rock face rather than something that's plonked on the top like some kind of outhouse or something like that. After all, it's not supposed to be the king's privy. Making sure the plastic terrain here blends in a little bit more, so adding lots of those smaller rocks. There's actually wooden beams and things that show through for the ruins, and I don't really want too many of those showing. I want it to be rock, so covering them over with the little stones and things. I could have cut them away, and I did think about that, but I knew I'd have lots of rocks to place, and I thought it'd be a lot quicker just to cover them over. And there we are. It needs a little bit of drying before I put some paint on it. But it's amazing how much cork bark will look like rock once it's painted. Beforehand, it can look a little bit like wood all over the place. But wait and see. Now, I think I went away for lunch. When I came back and looked at it again, I decided it didn't look quite dwarf enough, using Lord of the Rings terrain and all. So I just added a little dwarf buttress to the side there of the door, made from the Magnic Battle Forge as well. And there they are, both primed black, ready to go. So, it being rock, I thought I'd better start with some grey, and this is a little triad from two thin coats, a Wizard Grey, Carcharodon Grey, and a white as well. So, just slowly building up each layer at a time. Obviously, the biggest layer is going to be this Wizard Grey, this darker coat. I am actually trying to leave quite a lot of the black showing through, so I'm doing light layers and slowly building them up, focusing where the light would hit. This is almost zenithal in places, especially with the rock formations. I'm angling the airbrush in almost top down, trying to catch where the light would hit, just to really aid with the showing up the detail. And aid with the painting later on. I don't really want to come back and dry brush. I don't want that effect too much. I can do if I feel I need to, but if I can achieve it without dry brushing, that was the goal. No surprise at all that it's exactly the same method on the smaller piece. Again, trying to let the paint do the work for me, leaving lots of the black hidden, focusing towards the edge of the rock outcrops for a slightly stronger layer of paint. I'm even adding some grey onto the doorways and the bricks as well. Then as we return, we go up to the next layer of grey, so the lighter grey. I'm still being careful here not to cover too much of the previous layer. I want to see that layering, I want to slowly build it up, and I don't want it too bright yet. As I move towards that stonework, I am focusing a little bit in the centre here, almost using that kind of airbrush style of that brighter highlight in the centre areas. It's a little bit stylistic, but it will pay off later on when I add oil washes and it blends it in and tones it down a lot more. You can really see it starting to brighten up here as I slowly add the layers, and that lighter grey is starting to make it pop a little bit more, but still keeping to that method of facing top down as much as I possibly can so the undercuts stay grey. And again, continuing to do the same on the second piece, adding a little bit of light in the centre of the door there towards the bottoms of the stonework where the light would catch. And again, reinforcing around the edges of those outcrops of rock where the light would hit the most. And I'm always going brighter than I need to deliberately now, because I'll knock that back later on as I use the airbrush to glaze some inks on, or contrast it will be, and then some oil paints. You can see that even more here when it's almost pure white right on the edges of these outcrops. So they're looking pretty bright now, but later on, trust me, it will look a lot darker. Some final touches to that secondary piece, and we're really close to finishing all the grey layers now. And like I've said before, they do look quite white in places, but once I add the other colours, you'll see how much that tones it right back down again. But as I leave that to dry, we're ready to come back with some more colours. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. And if you're looking for some cool dice for your Dwarfen Mountain Holds army, do check out the channel sponsor Baron of Dice, link in the video description. And if you use the discount code Miniature Realms, you get 5% off as well. So it's time to add some other colour, and this is model colour wood grain, which is a sort of a mid brown with reddish undertones. I'm just going to build up some very thin layers here over all the areas that you can see that are black at the moment, just so we start to get a little bit of dark earth texture down. And then using that same brown, I'm just going into all the recesses on the sides of the rock here. First on the plastic terrain where the hill kind of runs into the rock, and then into the rock that we've built, and it just sort of starts to tie it all together. Means it's got different tones and which adds textures and things like that as well, but also means that it blends into that hillside rather than it looking like a big white sort of rock face just stuck on the top. As we get a little bit further along with that, I think you can really see it start to come together and take shape. It definitely blends it in more, makes the rock look more believable and that white look less stark. Much as before, continuing the same method onto that secondary piece, but I'm also using the airbrush to put a little thin layer of brown down onto the door as well, before I move on to the areas around the rocks and then actually the black area itself as a base. So some more model colour now, and this is German camo medium brown. And this is very simply a second layer of brown, slightly lighter, mostly focusing on the brown areas towards the bottom, so less on the rock areas. But again, leaving some of that darker wood grain brown showing through. We want a mottled multi-effect brown here. I don't want to completely cover it over with a lighter one, so it looking patchy is probably what we're after. But I am adding a few little bits on the rock faces as well, especially on these raised areas. I like the idea of a little bit of grass poking out along the top as well, so it's not just a sheer rock face. We've got that kind of rocky mountain hillsides where you've got areas of grass as well mixed in with the rock. But as you can see, just adding it to the wider area of the hill here really starts to lighten it up, give it a bit more tonal change and a bit more balanced overall. Continuing this over onto the secondary piece as well. Now I'm using some speed paint from Army Paint. You can use contrast, you can use express colour, and this is camo cloak and pallid bone. So starting with the pallid bone, I'm just going over the edges where that's most white on the edges of the rock. This just dulls it down and adds a little bit of a filter and takes away some of that brightness to it, but still makes it look lighter, which is what I was going for really. And you wanted to build that really high contrast into the paint. I wanted it to really stand out in photographs and things, and so adding that colour as a little bit of a filter afterwards just really adds to it and fixes. But when we get to the green, that does an awful lot more, a lot more heavy lifting. So not only am I adding some different tonal balance to the overall look of the rock, really brings it to life putting this green on there. I'm also doing some streaks down as if the water has run and left verdigris and algae, that kind of thing, running down the sides of the rocks, and I think it really starts to make it look realistic. Focusing further here on the sides with all the bricks around the bottom where the algae and moss and things might grow, and just adding these colours in, little lines down where it looks like it's run. Just really kind of going at it fairly haphazard in some ways, just doing a little bit, having a look at it, going back, doing a bit more. And I really just think it starts to make it look pretty good. And here I'm just adding it towards the bottom of those little creases around where the hill is and in between the rocks as well. Just adds a little bit more depth and the darkness. We're really motoring through now. It's time to add the first metallic. This is a Viking Gold, and I'm going to be dry brushing this on. This is a new dry brush I had from Knott's Hobbies. There's a recent review on the channel. There's a video. I'll try and remember to put a link in there now, but I'll also pop a link in the video description if you'd like to buy some dry brushes from them, and you get a little bit of money off if you order through the affiliate link in that description, 10%. These are really nice soft bristled dry brushes, and they're really good for dry brushing on metallics like these. Instead of going in and masking off and using an airbrush here, I was able to sort of slowly buff it on, and then you get this really smooth finish. Using that same Viking Gold, I'm just putting it around the edges of this door frame here. I think on the model there's supposed to be wood, but again, this isn't Middle Earth. This is a dwarfen door, so it's going to have lots and lots of metal on it. And then there's little runes and things from the Fire Slayers kit, so I was able to paint those in with gold as well and really start making it look much more dwarfish. Now using some Elven Gold, I know sacrilege, I'm just giving a little bit of a dry brush again using these same really ultra soft dry brushes, and it just goes on really smooth, like a really faint transition. So at the top there where there's a curve and it's shiny, it looks almost like buffed brass, and then it really picks up on the edges really nicely as well and just adds a little bit of total difference. And normally I'd just go in with an airbrush here and do that, but I tried it with these dry brushes and it worked really well. Now it's time to add some oil washes, and I've got dark mud and grease here, and these are ready mixed oil washes from the Soilworks range. You've seen these a lot on the channel if you're a regular viewer. I'm just using an old brush here. I don't want to destroy any good brushes. Slowly allowing them to run into all of the brickwork on here, and I'll put them all over the metallics as well. The beauty of these oil washes, if you haven't heard me bang on about it before, is that they run into the recesses really well, and you're able to wipe them away, unlike you can if you use a standard wash. So you can use these like a pin wash essentially, and I'm streaking down with them as well, and I can blend them out. And if I go too heavy and I want to remove them, a little bit of white spirit, Artist White Spirit with a brush will just take them back away again. And it just really looks great when it dries as well. It looks really matte, and it dries sort of chalky as well, so you get this really weathered looking effect on there, which is exactly what we want. And you can see here I'm just splashing it onto the metallics, and it just runs into all those recesses, really showing off the detail. And like I said, when it dries it'll look like it's weathered at the same time. And with that in mind, I'm using it in all of the little gaps around the rocks, knowing that when it dries, that it will look really chalky and dirty and look like all the dirt is ingrained into the corners. So not only does it add extra depth in terms of colour here to make it look more realistic and add to that contrast between the dark and the light there, it'll also weather it at the same time. And it being an oil wash, it's perfect for streaking as well. So we already have the green streaks that I've put on with the airbrush. Well, I've reinforced a couple of those here with these oil washes and painted a few new ones in. So there's a few more streaks where dirty rainwater has run down the face of the mountain. And as before, it's much the same on this secondary piece, so allowing it to run in between all the detail on that brickwork, and where it pulls you just let it smooth out and blend it out, and you just don't get the same kind of tide markings or drying on the flat surfaces that you would with a standard wash. So I left those oils overnight to dry and came in to check on them first thing in the morning with my coffee, and I was pretty happy with the way they were. They were ready to get on to the next stage. You can see those oils don't look wet and shiny anymore. They've really blended down, and I think it looks pretty good already. So I need PVA glue to stick this flock down, but I do want to water it down a little bit, almost 2 parts glue, 1 part water, so that it's much easier to control. We don't want any thick globules of glue, which you end up with a thick glob of flock on there afterwards as well. So I take a few seconds just to mix it all in properly, then using this old kid's brush, I think it is here, so I don't want to ruin any brushes with PVA glue. Just start to dapple it on in areas. Don't do the whole thing all at once, do it in sections, and then once you've got enough glue in the right place, you can start sprinkling the flock on. And I got this big old tub that was given to me a few years ago, and the mix has lasted me forever, which is great because I really like it. I just tend to put a little bit in that old cap here and then just sprinkle it on, making sure it's fairly thick when I put it on, and then I'll leave it to dry before I shake it off. This is Vallejo Deer Armour FX, and this is a thick mud, a European mud, I think. Now, it has to be fully dried to do this. I let the flock dry in the garden. It didn't take very long. It's been quite hot in the UK recently. And I'm just splodging this on in little areas. I'm not trying to be too uniform or anything like that. Just where the ground may have been trod on a little bit more, got a little bit damp. It just adds a little bit more variation and makes it a little bit more realistic. Needless to say now, but we continue the same method over onto the smaller piece, but I'm also sort of stippling a little bit on around the rock areas as if mud has been trodden up into the access way there. But I also continue it around onto the edges of the hill like I did on the larger piece as well. Very much in the final stages now. I'm just adding a few tufts. I'm trying to put them all over the place here really, but not sort of to dominate it. It's almost like dead grass that's or mountain grass that's growing up between the rocks, maybe a little bit on the mountain side itself. That's why I've gone for sort of brownish looking tufts rather than bright green verdant. And I also want to keep that palette looking sort of rock or brownish green rather than anything too bright. I did add the odd, longer, slightly lighter tuft there. Maybe it looks like something that could be nesting up there, or just a little bit of variance just on that main piece. Some longer grass that's growing out of the mountainside. And before I knew it, it was done really, a lot quicker than I expected, and this was pretty much the vision I had in my head when I started to think about it, when I saw that part of the Magmic Battle Forge and wondered if I could make it into sort of a doorway to a hold. Now it's not supposed to be a main doorway to a hold, it's supposed to be one of the minor doorways, and this is more of a secret passage or something like that. But they'll add a nice bit of terrain to my battlefields for playing with my dwarves, and something that should be fun to play across. Well, I hope you've been enjoying the video, and just before I show you the terrain all set up on the table with my Dwarfen army, if you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow and be seen by others. If you'd like to support even further, check out the channel's sponsors in the links below, and also check out the channel's Discord and Patreon. And now for some proper glamour shots all set up on my table and lit properly, and with a bit of a backdrop behind, because I really think that really helps the vision of what the piece is supposed to be. It's not perfect, there's a little bit of green field showing behind it where it wouldn't really look like that, it would be more mountains, but you get the idea. This was always the main piece and the main vision for it. I wanted to look slightly run down and look like a smaller door. As I said, I didn't want to dominate the battlefield. If I build a whole Dwarfen Hold to play some kind of siege games, it might be slightly different. But because this is a narrow one-sided piece, you can also have it right at the end of your table, so it doesn't really interfere with the battle. So it becomes a bit of a backdrop or side drop if you have it at the side edge of the table. It's not really giving anyone any kind of advantage. And then this smaller secondary piece, you could use as a hill in the centre of the table or towards the centre of the table, and that you can play over or fight over because it's regular hill sized, apart from that little sort of extra outcrop there. But I think they look nice together and work nicely in combination. And I've already got an idea of adding a third piece to the little set as well. And of course it looks even better with a Dwarfen army laid up in front of it. I really can't wait to get my new king painted when he arrives, hopefully over this weekend, if Games Workshop and the Postman are good to me. But please let me know what you think in the comments. Have you built any terrain to match your army, or are you planning to do some themed terrain to go with your army? I'd love to hear about it. And for those of you waiting on your Dwarfen Mountain Holds pre-orders, I hope they get to you swiftly. For those of you who are waiting for future army releases, I hope you don't have to wait too long either. It's a little bit painful at times, but the game's in a great place aside from that. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.